Chapter 1. The jungle around Palenque was a living wall of greenery, where vines coiled like serpents, and the crowns of the trees formed a canopy that barely let the sun's rays through. The air was heavy with moisture, filled with the monotonous hum of cicadas and the distant roar of howler monkeys. In this world of ancient mysticism lived Ixchel, a young hunter of the Maya people, whose name he shared with the moon goddess herself. He was neither priest nor warrior in the traditional sense, but his skill with bow and dagger made him respected in the city. His skin was sun-bronzed, the scars on his arms told stories of past hunts, and his dark eyes carried a sharpness that could read the jungle's secrets. Dressed in a simple tunic of woven cotton, adorned with quetzal feathers, he bore a flint dagger at his belt, its edge honed to perfection. His hair, black as night, was tied with a strap of peccary leather, and around his neck hung a jade amulet, a gift from his father, who had died in a hunt years before. It was a morning in the rainy season, when the sky hung low and the clouds threatened to burst. Ixchel awoke in his hut, built of palm leaves and clay, at the edge of the city. The smell of corn porridge rose from the hearth, where his mother, Zunan, stirred the pot with hands marked by decades of toil. Her face was wrinkled, her eyes clouded with sorrow for lost children, yet her voice was steady when she spoke. "Ixchel, my son," she said, her voice creaking like dry branches, "today is the day of the sacrifice ceremony. The priests say the gods are restless. You must fetch the sacred offering from the jungle." Ixchel nodded, but a weight pressed upon his chest. The night had brought a dream. A serpent, vast as a river, coiled around the temple and swallowed the sun. For the Maya, omens were sacred, and this one was dark, a warning of change. He stepped out of the hut, his sandals sinking into the damp earth. Palenque awoke around him, a city of stone and mystery. Pyramid temples rose toward the heavens, their stairs worn smooth by generations of feet. The cobblestones glistened with dew, and the scent of copal incense mingled with the sweetness of flowers from the sacred gardens. Children ran laughing between the houses, their voices bright as birdsong. Women carried jars of water from the river, their braids swaying with each step. Warriors tattooed with jaguars and serpents gathered at the ball court, where the day's ritual game would decide who honored the gods or paid with their life. Ixchel took his bow, crafted of mahogany and strung with tapir sinew, and slung a quiver over his shoulder. His mother followed him to the door, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Be careful," she whispered. "The jungle gives, but it also takes." He nodded, remembering his father's death, devoured by a crocodile at the river, his screams echoing in Ixchel's childhood memories. But today was no ordinary hunt. The priests demanded the heart of a white deer, a rare creature said to be a manifestation of the goddess Ixchel. To hunt, it was to challenge fate itself. He left Palenque through the eastern gate, where guards in feathered helmets nodded at him. The jungle swallowed him at once, its foliage a wall of green shutting out the sounds of the city. Sunbeams pierced through in patches, dancing on the ground like fireflies. He moved silently, his sandals barely leaving prints in the soft earth. Every sound was measured, a twig snapping, a bird flapping, the faint dripping of rain from the leaves. His senses sharpened. He caught the smell of damp bark, the taste of salty sweat on his lips, the sticky air clinging to his skin. Hours passed as he ventured deeper into the jungle, where the trees grew taller and the shadows thicker. He followed tracks, small signs like a bent branch or a soft impression in the mud. Suddenly he froze. On the ground were hoofprints, fresh and deep, surrounded by trampled grass. The white deer was near. His heart pounded, adrenaline surged through his veins. He drew his bow, muscles taut as sinew, and crept forward, each step a dance with danger. He remembered his father's words. "The jungle is a mother, but she is not forgiving." In a clearing, bathed in golden light, he saw it. The white deer stood still, its coat shimmering like moonlight, its antlers elegant as the branches of a cyber tree. Its eyes met his, and for a moment he felt a connection, as if the goddess herself gazed upon him. But the hunt demanded action. He aimed, the fletching steady against his cheek, and released. At the last instant, the deer turned, and the arrow struck a branch with a dull thunk. The deer bolted, its hooves echoing like drums. Ixchel cursed under his breath and gave chase, branches whipping his face and leaving red marks on his skin. The jungle became a blur of green, the sounds magnified. His footsteps thunderous, the deer's hooves like a fleeing heartbeat. He leapt over a fallen log, roots clutching at his feet, but pressed on, driven by duty and instinct. Sweat streamed down his brow, mixing with dust and mud, his breath ragged and burning. Suddenly the ground opened before him, a cenote, a deep, water-filled sinkhole, sacred to the Maya as a gateway to Xibalba, the underworld. The water was dark, reflecting the sky like a mirror of secrets. The deer halted at the edge, turned, its eyes gleaming. Ixchel slowed, bow raised again, but he hesitated. Was this a test? To kill a goddess's manifestation could rouse the god's wrath. The tension was unbearable, his heart beating like a war drum. Then came a growl behind him, low and menacing. He turned slowly, every muscle taut. A jaguar stood there, its coat mottled like the night, eyes yellow as glowing embers. Its teeth bared in a deathly grin, muscles rippling like steel beneath its fur. Fear washed over Ixchel, cold as the cenote's waters, but adrenaline seized him. He rolled aside as the jaguar lunged, claws raking the air where he had stood. He drew his dagger, flint cold in his palm, and rose with knees bent, ready. The battle was brutal, a dance of life and death. The jaguar circled him, its growl echoing through the clearing like a war chant. Ixchel sweated, every muscle strained, his focus locked on the beast's movements. He lunged, dagger flashing, but the jaguar was quicker, striking his shoulder with a claw. Pain exploded like fire, blood streaming hot and sticky down his arm. He screamed, not in surrender but defiance. He spun, stabbing the jaguar's side, cutting through fur and flesh. The beast roared, staggered, but leapt again, claws like lightning. They rolled on the ground, earth and leaves swirling around them like a storm. Ixchel's breaths came in ragged gasps, the taste of blood in his mouth mixed with the bitterness of soil. He felt the jaguar's breath, hot and raw, on his face. With a final surge, driven by sheer will, he plunged the dagger deep into the jaguar's chest. The animal jerked, collapsed with a dull thud, its eyes glassy in the moonlight. Ixchel lay panting, pain pulsing in his shoulder, blood dripping onto the earth. He looked up. The white deer was gone, vanished into the jungle like a spirit. The failure strung more than the wound. He had hunted for the ceremony, for the gods, for his people, and now stood empty-handed. But as he looked at the jaguar, its body still in the clearing, he realized something. The jaguar was a symbol of the war god, a mighty creature whose heart could replace the deer's in the ritual. It was not what the priest had asked for, but perhaps what the gods had sent. He knelt, cutting into its fur, and removed the heart, warm and bloody. He wrapped it in a banana leaf, its weight a reminder of the price of survival. He bound his wound with vines and leaves, pain throbbing in his shoulder. The sun now stood high, and he knew he had to hurry back. The way home was perilous, snakes slithered through the grass, and the river swelled with rain. He waded through the currents, water tugging at his legs, crocodile eyes lurking beneath the surface like glowing pearls. He clutched the heart tightly, its warmth a contrast to the river's chill. As he neared Palenque, he heard the drums, their rhythm the pulse of the city. The ceremony had begun. He ran through the gate, sweat mingling with blood, and climbed the pyramid's steps, each one an agony. The people gathered below, their faces painted in red and black patterns, their eyes filled with reverence and expectation. The priests, adorned with feathered crowns and jade necklaces, stood atop, their voices rising in prayers to the heavens. The eldest priest, his face a map of wrinkles and his eyes burning with fanaticism, met him. "What do you bring, hunter?" he asked, his voice a wind from Xibalba. Ixchel unwrapped the leaf, revealing the jaguar's heart. Silence fell over the crowd, broken only by the drums. The priest took the heart, weighing it in his hands, his gaze suspicious. "The gods accept," he finally said, "but the omens are dark. Night comes with change." He lifted the heart to the sky, and the people cheered, but Ixchel felt no relief. The words echoed within him, change. What did it mean? Rumors of Spaniards, the dream of the serpent, the jaguar's attack, all pointed to something greater. The ceremony continued with song and dance, incense spiraling toward the clouds. Ixchel stood at the pyramid's edge, bloodied and weary, yet a fire burned within. He felt this was only the beginning. The jungle had whispered secrets, and the city hid more. As night fell, stars lit the sky, their light like watchful eyes over Palenque. But in the darkness, unseen by all, a figure moved at the city's edge. A stranger, clad in gleaming armor, with eyes that mirrored another world. He carried a sword, and his steps were silent as a jaguar's. Who was he, and what did he seek in the land of the Maya? Ixchel returned to his hut, but sleep eluded him. The dreams returned, the serpent, the sun, blood running down the pyramid steps. He awoke sweating, his heart racing, and heard a sound outside, footsteps, light as the wind. He seized his dagger and crept out, moonlight casting long shadows across the ground. A figure fled into the jungle, swift and silent. Without thinking, he followed, his hunter's instincts guiding him through the dark. At night, the jungle was another world, filled with owl calls and insect hums. Branches reached for him as if alive, and the ground was treacherous beneath his feet. He tracked the faint traces until he reached a clearing. There stood the stranger, facing him, helmet hiding his face, but golden hair glinting. A Spaniard. Rumors of such men had reached Palenque, men from the sea, with weapons that spat fire. "Who are you?" Ixchel asked in Maya, dagger raised. The stranger gave no answer, but drew a sword, its blade shining like a star. The fight began, swift and violent. The sword hissed through the air, Ixchel ducked, parrying with sparks. Pain flared in his shoulder, but he fought on, his movements lithe as a cat's. They circled, breaths heavy, the ground torn beneath them. Ixchel tripped the stranger, dagger at his throat. "Why do you follow me?" he growled. The stranger laughed, cold and harsh. "I seek the treasure, Maya," he said in broken Maya. "The temple hides gold and secrets." Anger rose in Ixchel, hot as lava, invaders who wished to steal from the gods. He bound the stranger with vines, his hands swift despite the pain, and dragged him back to Palenque. The priests awaited at the gate, their eyes hard as obsidian. "A spy," they said. "He brings ruin." But the stranger whispered, before being thrown into the cell beneath the pyramid, "There are more. They come with fire and steel." A chill spread in Ixchel's chest. War was approaching, and he was not certain he could stop it. He returned to his hut, but his thoughts swirled. The dream of the serpent, the jaguar's heart, the Spaniard's words, all pointed to a storm about to sweep over Palenque. He gripped his dagger tighter, its coldness a reminder of duty. The night was silent now, but he knew it would not remain so. Morning came with new drums, and the people gathered once more. The priests spoke of sacrifices and the will of the gods, but Ixchel barely listened. His gaze was fixed on the jungle, where shadows moved. He felt the weight of the crystal, not a physical crystal, but a sense of something greater, something waiting. He thought of his mother's words, "The jungle gives and takes." He had received the jaguar's heart, but what would it take from him next? And what did the Spaniard's words of a treasure in the temple mean? He walked to the pyramid's base, where warriors trained and children played. An old man, a weaver of stories, sat by a fire and spoke of Palenque, the king who descended to Xibalba and returned with knowledge. "There are secrets beneath the stone," he said, his eyes glimmering, "but only the brave find them." Ixchel felt a pull toward the temple, as if something called him. He decided to explore, to seek answers before war came. With a torch in hand, he crept into a hidden corridor beneath the pyramid, known only to hunters like him. The walls were cold, covered in hieroglyphs telling of kings and gods. He read them by torchlight. Palenque saw the stars fall and found a path to the sun. The passage led deeper, the air stale, heavy with mold and dust. A sound, dripping water, echoed like a heartbeat. Suddenly, a trap triggered, arrows shooting from the walls. He ducked, heart racing, and pressed on, breath short. At last he reached a chamber, its walls gleaming with jade and gold. At its center lay a stone slab, a map, etched with lines and symbols. It spoke of Kainish Balam, the sun jaguar, a lost city in the jungle. But he was not alone. Footsteps echoed, and a shadow moved, Chaac, the warrior who had betrayed his people. "The map is mine," he hissed, his club raised. The fight was swift, Ixchel's dagger swifter than Chaac's greed. He bound the traitor, seized the map, and fled upward, heart pounding. Back in the city, he delivered Chaac to the priests, but kept the map hidden. He felt its weight, not only in his hand but in his soul. The Spaniards were near, and the sun jaguar could be Palenque's salvation or its downfall. He looked toward the jungle, where morning light pierced through. His journey had only just begun, and the gods were watching. Chapter 2, The Jungle Around Palenque, was a world of eternal green chaos, where vines hung like snares and the trees whispered secrets older than human memory. Sunlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy, casting patches of light that danced on the ground like spirits in motion. Ixchel stood at the city's eastern gate, his body still sore from yesterday's battle with the jaguar. The wound in his shoulder throbbed beneath the makeshift bandage of vines and leaves, and his tunic was stained with dried blood and mud. In his hand lay the map from the temple's chamber, an ancient stone tablet, barely larger than his palm, engraved with hieroglyphs and lines pointing toward a place called Kainish Balam, the sun jaguar. Its symbols spoke of a lost city hidden deep within the jungle, where a secret was said to rest, a secret that could save Palenque from the pale invaders rumored to be approaching from the sea. His dark eyes, sharp as the flint of his dagger, scanned the horizon. The drums from the ceremony still echoed in the city behind him, mingling with the people's song and the priest's prayers to Itzamna and Chaac. But Ixchel's heart was heavy. The Spaniard's words, "Mori will come, with fire and steel," had lodged in his mind like a poisoned arrow. He could not ignore the threat, not after seeing the foreigner's sword glint in the moonlight, not after Chaac's betrayal in the temple. The map was his only clue, yet following it meant challenging the jungle, the gods, and perhaps even his own people's trust. He slipped the tablet into a leather pouch at his belt, its cold weight a constant reminder of what was at stake. At his side stood Ixchel, his childhood friend, a short but muscular warrior with a tattoo of a serpent coiling across his chest. Ixchel's eyes were narrow, his spear resting against his shoulder. "You look as if you've seen the gates of Xibalba," he said, his voice light but tinged with concern. "What is it you clutch so tightly?" Ixchel hesitated, then showed him the map, concealing its details. "A secret," he said curtly. "Something that may save us." Ixchel raised an eyebrow but nodded. Their friendship was strong, yet Ixchel could not shake the mistrust born of Chaac's treachery. How many more in Palenque could be tempted by gold or power? He gathered a small group for the journey: Ixchel, for his strength and loyalty; Chaac, a young priest apprentice with thin arms but a mind that could read the stars, his eyes always fixed on the heavens as if seeking answers; and Mayana, a hunter unmatched in tracking, her braids adorned with feathers and her gaze sharp as a hawk's. They were few, to avoid attention, and Ixchel told them only what was necessary. They would follow the map to a place that could protect the city. The rest he kept to himself, fear of betrayal lingering like a shadow. They left Palenque at midday, when the sun stood high and the heat made the air shimmer like a mirage. The jungle swallowed them at once, its foliage a wall that shut out the city's sounds. Leaves brushed their skin, roots tangled their sandals, and mosquitoes swarmed like a choir of demons. Mayana swatted them with a branch, muttering curses, while Chaac read the map's hieroglyphs in the glow of a torch. "It speaks of a river that sings and a stone that weeps," he said, his voice low so as not to awaken the jungle's spirits. "We must find the river first." Hours passed, and the jungle grew denser, darker, as if trying to hold them back. The sounds shifted, the cicada's song dimmed, replaced by the distant murmur of water. They followed it until they reached a river, its surface glimmering like molten silver under the moonlight. But this was no ordinary river. The water gave off strange tones, as if stones beneath the surface struck one another in an ancient melody. "The singing river," Chaac whispered, his eyes shining with reverence. Mayana knelt by the bank, dipped her fingers into the water and tasted it. "Sweet," she said, "but it feels alive." A shiver ran down Ixchel's spine. The river was sacred, perhaps a gateway to the gods, and he remembered the priest's warnings about disturbing such places. They built a raft from bamboo and vines, their hands raw from the labor. Sweat beaded on their foreheads, and the air was sticky, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. As they paddled across, the current tugged fiercely at the raft, as if trying to swallow it whole. A shadow moved beneath the surface, long, sinuous, not a crocodile but something else. "Hold on," Ixchel shouted, his spear ready. The shadow vanished, but Ixchel's heart pounded. They reached the far shore, wet and breathless, their sandals heavy with mud. On the opposite bank rose a hill crowned with a solitary ceiba tree, its roots clawing into the earth. The map pointed here, and when they climbed the slope, they found the weeping stone, a cliff shaped like a screaming face, water seeping from mossy eye sockets. Chaac traced the hieroglyphs with his fingers. "Here begins the path to Balam," he said, "but it is guarded." He pointed to a symbol, a jaguar with wings, a creature of myth. Ixchel's pulse quickened. He had slain a jaguar before, but one with wings. That was divine, something that could crush them. The path wound upward, marked by ancient stones carved with serpents and stars. Night fell, and the jungle became a world of shadows. Fireflies flickered like wandering souls, and owls' hoots cut through the silence. Mayana suddenly raised her hand. "Tracks," she whispered, pointing at the ground. The marks were neither human nor animal, but something else, claws, too large, too deep. "What is this?" Ixchel asked, his voice trembling for the first time. Before Ixchel could answer, a roar shook the earth. Branches cracked, and from the darkness emerged a beast. It was a jaguar, but larger than any Ixchel had seen, its pelt glowing in the moonlight, wings of shadow unfurling behind it. Its eyes burned like embers, its teeth gleamed like obsidian. The group froze, weapons raised but hands shaking. "Balam's guardian," Chaac whispered, his voice barely audible. "We must prove ourselves worthy." Ixchel stepped forward, dagger in one hand, map in the other. "I am Ixchel of Palenque," he shouted, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "We seek Balam to protect our people." The beast roared again, the ground quaking, and lunged, its wings whipping the air like a storm. Ixchel dove aside, claws tearing into his leg, pain flaring like fire. Ixchel hurled his spear, but it bounced off the creature's hide as if striking stone. Mayana loosed an arrow, piercing its eye, and the beast howled but pressed the attack. Chaac began to chant, an ancient hymn to Itzamna, the sun god. The words filled the air, and the creature faltered, as if the song bound its soul. Ixchel saw his chance. He charged, dagger raised, and drove it into the beast's throat. Black glowing blood spurted as the creature collapsed with a final roar, its wings dissolving like smoke in the wind. The group stood panting, bloodied and shaken. "You're insane," Ixchel said, though a faint smile tugged at his lips. Mayana nodded, her face pale but resolute. Chaac knelt beside the fallen beast, his hands trembling. "We have passed the test," he said, "but more await." The path climbed higher, lined with ruins, pillars draped in vines, statues of gods with eroded faces, their eyes staring into eternity. The air grew colder, the scent of damp stone heavier, and Ixchel's wound throbbed with each step. At last they reached a plateau where a gate rose, carved from a single stone, adorned with hieroglyphs glowing faintly in the dark. The map marked Balam beyond, but a warning was inscribed. "Only those pure of heart may pass, the others shall meet Xibalba." Doubt gnawed at Ixchel. Was he pure? He had killed, lied, kept secrets. But he thought of Palenque, his mother, his people, the temples, and stepped forward. He pressed his hand against the gate, which trembled, warm like living flesh, and opened with a deep groan. Beyond lay a valley bathed in an unreal light. Towers of gold and jade gleamed, the ruins of Balam rising toward the sky like memories of a vanished age. But they were not alone. Voices carried, not Maya's speech, but the harsh, foreign tongue of the Spaniard. Ixchel signaled the group to hide, and they crouched behind a fallen pillar, hearts racing. Through the brush they saw them, pale men in shining armor, their swords glinting in the light. Their leader, a scarred man, held a map, a copy of Ixchel's. "How?" Mayana hissed, anger in her voice. "Chaac must have betrayed us before he was captured." Tensions swelled like a river ready to flood. The Spaniards moved toward a temple in the valley's center, where a statue of a jaguar with the face of the sun stood, its jade eyes glowing as if alive. Ixchel felt the weight of the map against his chest. The secret they sought lay there. He whispered a plan. Mayana and Ixchel would create a distraction while he and Chaac slipped into the temple. They nodded, their faces hard with resolve. Mayana drew her bow, Ixchel gripped his spear. As the Spaniards neared the temple, Mayana loosed an arrow into a torch, which fell and set the grass ablaze. Flames leapt, and chaos erupted. Spaniards shouted, their leader barking orders. Ixchel hurled stones, luring them away, his laughter wild as a monkey's. Ixchel and Chaac darted toward the temple, their steps silent on the mossy stone. Inside, the air was cold, heavy with incense and ancient death. The walls were covered in frescoes depicting Maya history, wars, sacrifices, falling stars. At the center stood an altar, and upon it a crystal, the size of a fist, pulsing with inner light. Chaac gasped. "The heart of the sun," he whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "A relic of the gods, it can summon their power." Ixchel reached out, but before he could touch it, footsteps echoed. The Spaniards' leader stood in the doorway, sword drawn. "Give me the crystal, native," he growled. Ixchel placed himself before the altar, dagger ready. The fight began, the sword swift, but Ixchel agile, dodging and parrying. Chaac hurled a pot of incense, filling the room with smoke. Ixchel seized the moment, his dagger slashing the Spaniard's arm, but the man was strong, throwing Ixchel against the wall. Pain flared in his back, but duty drove him on. Chaac's chant rose higher, and the crystal blazed brighter. The Spaniard laughed, but his laughter turned to screams as the light seared his flesh. He fled, leaving a trail of blood. Ixchel seized the crystal, its warmth throbbing like a heartbeat. But cries rang outside. Ixchel and Mayana were in danger. He rushed out, the crystal hidden in his tunic. The Spaniards had surrounded his friends, but Mayana's arrows and Ixchel's spear kept them at bay. Ixchel leapt into the fight, dagger flashing, blood flowing like a river. They fled, Spaniards in pursuit. The crystal burned against Ixchel's chest, as if with a will of its own. They reached the singing river again, but its currents were wild, as if Chaac himself was enraged. Their raft shattered, and they swam, lungs filling with water. On the far side they collapsed, gasping but alive. The crystal was theirs, but the price was heavy. The Spaniards knew of Ixchel Balam, and betrayal lingered in the air. Ixchel looked at his friends, their faces bloodied but determined. "We must protect this," he said, raising the crystal. "For Palenque, for the gods." But the jungle was not silent. Footsteps echoed, voices in the foreign tongue, Mori intruders, or something worse. The night was not over, and the danger had only begun. Ixchel gripped the crystal tighter, its light a beacon in the dark, and led the group onward, into the heart of the jungle, toward an unknown fate. Chapter 3, the pale light of the moon cast a silvery shimmer over the singing river, whose waters carried an ancient melody, as though the stones beneath its surface whispered secrets from a time when the gods walked among men. Ixchel crouched at the riverbank, his body aching from the battles at Ixchel Balam, his shoulder and leg throbbing beneath the makeshift bandages of vines and leaves. In his tunic lay the heart of the sun, a crystal that pulsed like a living being, its warmth both comforting and threatening against his chest. Sweat beaded on his brow, mingling with clay and dried blood, and his dark eyes reflected the moonlight, filled with determination, yet shadowed with doubt. Around him lay his companions. Ixchel, his muscular arms scratched and caked with mud, his spear resting against a stone. Mayana, her braids loosened, eyes sharp and watchful as a jaguar's. And Chaac, the young priest apprentice, clinging to his staff, his frail figure trembling with exhaustion. They had survived the clash at the lost city, yet the Spaniards' presence, their gleaming armor and weapons that spat fire, loomed like a growing shadow in their minds. The jungle was no longer a refuge. It had become a labyrinth of perils where each step might lead to death or revelation. Ixchel felt the crystal's pulse, as though the heartbeat of a slumbering god. Chaac had named it the heart of the sun, a relic said to summon the power of Itzamna, the sun god who ruled over life and death. But what did that truly mean? Could it drive back the invaders, or would it awaken something far worse? He recalled how the Spaniard's skin had burned beneath its light, and yet how his own hands had trembled as he held it. Was he worthy? The doubt gnawed at him like a serpent, but he forced it aside. Palenque was in danger, his mother awaited him in the city, and the future of his people rested upon his shoulders. He could not fail them. "We cannot stay here," whispered Mayana, her voice sharp as the flint tip of her arrow. She pointed toward the jungle, where distant sounds, snapping branches, murmured voices in the foreign tongue, cut through the silence of night. The Spaniards were near, perhaps guided by the traitor Chaac, who might have revealed more before he was bound. Or were there others, spies hidden among the Maya themselves? Suspicion clung to the air like poison, and Ixchel glanced at his companions. Ixchel met his gaze with a firm nod, but Zoc's eyes were fixed on the crystal, as if he saw something invisible to the rest. "We must return to Palenque," Ixchel said, his voice low but resolute. "The priests must learn of the crystal and of the invaders, but the straight path is too dangerous. They are tracking us." He unrolled the map, its hieroglyphs barely visible in the moonlight. The lines marked an alternate route, leading through a part of the jungle known as the Nest of the Black Tongue, a place even the bravest hunters avoided. Stories spoke of serpents as large as trees, spirits that stole souls, and cenotes that plunged straight into Xibalba, the underworld. Yet it was their only chance to evade the Spaniards. He tucked the map back into its leather pouch, its chill a stark reminder of the peril they faced. The group rose to their feet, bodies sore but spirits burning. Mayana led the way, her eyes scanning the ground for traps or foes. Ixchel carried his spear across his shoulder, his stride heavy yet unwavering, while Zoc whispered prayers to Chaac, the rain god, asking for protection. The jungle swirled with shadows, vines hung like snares, roots clutched at their sandals. The air was thick with damp, the scent of rotting leaves and sweet flowers cloying to the point of nausea. Insects whined, and somewhere a howler monkey roared, its cry a warning from the gods. Ixchel's wounds throbbed with each step, yet he pressed on, driven by the crystal's pulse and the thought of Palenque. Hours later, the ground softened, grew soggy, and a foul stench rose from the earth, a stench of mold mixed with something darker. They had reached the Nest of the Black Tongue. The trees here were gnarled, their bark twisted into faces, branches swaying without wind as if alive. Mayana halted, lifting her hand. "Look," she whispered, pointing to the ground. Bones were scattered about, not human, but from something larger, perhaps a tapir, perhaps something unknown. They were scored with tooth marks, and scattered among them lay ash and incense. A chill crawled down Ixchel's spine, as though the jungle itself exhaled menace. Zoc knelt by the bones, his fingers tracing the marks. "This was a sacrifice," he said, voice quivering, "not to our gods, but to something else. Something ancient." He pointed to a symbol carved into a nearby stone, an image of a serpent with wings, resembling the creature they had fought at Kainish Balam. "Chaac, the feathered serpent, but twisted. This is a place of dark rituals." His words lingered heavy in the air. Ixchel tightened his grip on his spear, Mayana drew her bowstring taut, and Ixchel felt the crystal pulsing as though in warning. Before they could move on, a hiss arose, like wind through dry leaves, but deeper, more threatening. The ground trembled, and from the shadows emerged a serpent, its body as thick as a man's waist, its scales gleaming like black jade in the moonlight. Its eyes burned red, glowing like coals, and its forked black tongue lashed the air. The group staggered back, weapons raised, but the serpent did not strike. It fixed its gaze on Ixchel as though it could see the crystal through his tunic. "It knows," Zoc whispered, barely audible. "It feels the heart of the sun." Ixchel drew his flint dagger, its edge cool in his hand, but Ixchel seized his arm. "Do not fight." "Pray," Zoc began to chant, a hymn to Chaac, his voice rising over the serpent's hiss. But the serpent's hiss grew louder, mocking, its body coiling like a river of shadows. Suddenly, it struck swift as lightning. Mayana loosed an arrow, striking its side, but the shaft bounced harmlessly off its armored scales. Ixchel hurled his spear, yet the serpent writhed aside, its tail whipping out, slamming him in the chest. He was thrown back into the mud, his breath rasping. The crystal burned against Ixchel's skin as though summoning him. He drew it forth, and its light erupted, flooding the glade with blinding brilliance. The serpent shrieked, a sound not of this world, recoiling as its eyes narrowed. But the light revealed something else, shadows moving at the edges of the glade, human figures. Spaniards. No, these were clad in Maya garments, faces painted black and red. Traitors from Palenque, led by Chaac, who had clearly escaped his bonds. Chaac, Ixchel cried, his voice burning with fury. You betray your people for gold? Chaac laughed, his eyes glittering with greed. Gold is but the beginning, hunter. The Spaniards promise power, and the crystal is mine. He raised a club of obsidian, flanked by 5 warriors, their weapons gleaming in the crystal's light. The battle broke like a storm. Mayana's arrows pierced one man's shoulder. Ixchel, bloodied but unbroken, lunged and drove his spear through another. Chaac sang, his voice now a prayer for protection, while Ixchel faced Chaac. Their weapons clashed, dagger against club, sparks scattering like fireflies. Chaac struck hard as a hammer, but Ixchel was quicker, ducking and weaving through the glade. The crystal glowed in his hand, its light burning Chaac's skin when he drew near, but the serpent was not gone. It surged again, this time against the traitors, seizing one in its jaws and crushing him like a dry branch. Chaos engulfed them. Spaniards burst from the jungle, their thunder weapons roaring, smoke choking the air with acrid stench. A ball of fire struck a tree near Ixchel, splinter showering down. He saw his chance amid the turmoil. He lunged at Chaac, his dagger piercing the traitor's side. Chaac screamed, fell, hatred blazing in his eyes. You cannot stop them, he hissed before collapsing, blood seeping into the mud. Run, Ixchel cried to his companions. They fled, serpent and Spaniards at their heels. The jungle became a blur of sound and motion, shouts, roars, thunderous blasts. Branches lashed their faces, roots snared their feet, but they raced onward, driven by sheer instinct to survive. They reached a cenote, its dark waters glimmering like a gateway to the underworld. We must dive, Ixchel gasped. Mayana hesitated, eyes wide with fear, but Ixchel nodded, his bloodied face resolute. Chaac was pale, yet followed silently, his prayers now hushed. They leapt, the water icy, dragging them down like the grasp of Xibalba. Ixchel clutched the crystal tightly, its light glowing faint beneath the surface, like a star in the night. They swam, lungs burning, until they emerged in a cavern beyond the cenote. They scrambled ashore, coughing, shivering, their clothes heavy with water. The cavern was vast, its walls encrusted with crystals that caught the light of the heart of the sun, casting rainbows and shadows across the stone. The air was cold, thick with damp and the weight of something ancient, but they were not safe. Voices echoed from the cenote, the Spaniards had followed, their torches casting flickering shadows. And something else stirred in the cavern, a hiss deeper and more ominous than the serpent's. Chaac pointed at a mural on the wall, depicting a warrior holding the crystal, surrounded by shadows shaped like men, their eyes glowing red. The spirits of Xibalba, he whispered, his voice breaking with terror. They are awakening. The crystal's pulse quickened in Ixchel's hand, warning him. He looked at his companions, their faces drawn with fear yet burning with resolve. We must protect this, he said, his voice steady despite his pain. At any cost. The cavern shook, stalactites raining down like spears from the ceiling. The Spaniards' voices drew closer, steel clattering. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged, not Spaniard, not spirit, but a woman clad in a cloak of feathers, her face hidden by a jaguar-shaped mask. Give me the heart of the sun, she said, her voice echoing as though from another world. Or die in Xibalba. Chapter 4. The cave's cold, damp air bit into Ixchel's skin, and the crystals on the walls cast a kaleidoscopic light that made the shadows dance like spirits on their way to Xibalba. The heart of the sun pulsed in his hand, its warmth like a burning coal against his chest, but also a weight that carried the fate of the world. Before him stood the woman in the jaguar mask, her feathered mantle glittering in the faint glow, as if it were woven from stars. Her voice, when she spoke, echoed with an authority that made his knees tremble. Give me the heart of the sun, or Xibalba will devour you all. Behind her the cave vibrated, stalactites crashing down like spears from the ceiling, and distant screams, those of the Spaniards, and perhaps something worse, cut through the darkness. Ixchel, Mayana, and Chaac stood at his side, their faces pale but resolute, weapons raised despite the fear glimmering in their eyes. The jungle, the cenote, the betrayal and the chase had led them here, to this underworld where the border between life and death was thin as a spider's thread. Ixchel met the woman's masked gaze, though he could not see her eyes. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady despite his heart pounding like temple drums. "Why do you want the crystal?" He held the heart of the sun tightly, its light pulsing in rhythm with his own pulse, as though it were a part of him. He remembered Chac's words, a relic of the gods, capable of calling upon Itzamna's power. But what power, and at what cost? His shoulder and leg ached, blood seeping through his bandages, and his tunic was torn, sticky with sweat and mud. He tasted salt and earth in his mouth, and the smell of damp stone filled his lungs. The woman stepped forward, her mantle whispering like leaves in the wind. "I am Kinnish, guardian of the heart of the sun," she said, her voice now softer, yet carrying an undertone of ancient sorrow. "I am neither goddess nor mortal, but a soul bound to this relic since the time of Pacal. The crystal is not only power, it is balance. If it falls into the wrong hands, the sun will go dark, and Xibalba will rise." She stretched out a hand, her fingers adorned with rings of jade and obsidian, glimmering like stars in the cave's gloom. "Give it to me, and I can protect your people." Ixchel hesitated. He thought of Palenque, his mother weaving by the fire, the children playing at the ball court, the priests singing to the gods. But he also remembered Chac's betrayal, the Spaniard's greed, and the serpent in Blacktongue's lair. How could he trust this Kinnish? Was she truly a guardian, or just another temptation from the underworld? He glanced at his companions. Ixchel stood firm, his spear ready, but his breaths were heavy, blood seeping from a wound in his arm. Mayana had her bow drawn, eyes narrowed, ready to strike. Chaac, hands trembling, whispered a prayer to Ixchel, though his gaze was fixed on the crystal, as if he saw its secrets. Before Ixchel could answer, a thunderous blast echoed, the shot of a Spanish firearm, booming through the cave like Chac's lightning. The wall behind them cracked, stones raining down, dust swirling in the air. The Spaniards had found them, their armor gleaming in torchlight, their footsteps echoing like death knells. Their leader, the scarred man from Kainish Balam, stepped forward, sword drawn, eyes burning with greed. "The crystal is mine," he roared in broken Maya, his voice cutting through the cave's chill. "Give it or die." Chaos erupted like a storm. Mayana loosed an arrow, striking a Spaniard in the shoulder, his scream mingling with the cave's echoes. Ixchel lunged, his spear piercing another, blood spraying like a dark fountain. Chaac flung a handful of crystal dust from the cave floor, which exploded in a dazzling flash when it met the heart of the sun's glow, blinding the enemies momentarily. Ixchel turned to Kinnish, but she was gone, her mantle a shadow fading into the dark. "Wait," he cried, but his voice was drowned in the clamor of battle. The Spaniards were many, their muskets thundering, the smoke stinging lungs like poison. Blood slicked the cave floor, mingled with water seeping from the walls, and the smell of iron and death choked the air. Ixchel fought with his dagger, his movements quick but heavy with exhaustion. Pain flared in his shoulder and leg, each strike agony, but he could not give up. The crystal burned in his hand, its light casting battle shadows on the walls like an ancient fresco of war and sacrifice. Then came a roar, not human, not Spanish, but something from the depths of Xibalba. The ground trembled, and from a crack in the cave floor shadows rose, figures human yet not, their eyes glowing red like those on the fresco Chaac had seen. "The spirits," Chaac cried, his voice breaking with terror. "The crystal has awakened them." The shadows moved like smoke, claws reaching for both Maya and Spaniard alike. A Spaniard screamed as one dragged him into the darkness, his body vanishing as if it had never existed. Ixchel felt fear grip his heart like a cold hand, but the crystal pulsed, urging him to act. He lifted the heart of the sun, and its light burst forth, flooding the cave with a glow like the noonday sun. The shadows shrieked, recoiling, their forms dissolving like mist in the wind. But the Spaniards, blinded by greed, pressed forward. Their leader swung his sword at Ixchel, the blade flashing like a deadly star. Ixchel leapt between them, his spear deflecting the strike, but the sword cut deep into his chest. He fell, blood spilling from the wound, his breath ragged. Ixchel, protect it, he whispered, before his eyes closed, his body still on the cave floor. Rage and grief surged in Ixchel like a breaking flood. He screamed, raw and furious, and lunged at the Spaniard, dagger sinking into his arm. But the man was strong, his blows hammer-like, and Ixchel staggered, pain threatening to overwhelm him. Mayana pulled him back, her arrows spent, her face bloodied but fierce. Chaac chanted, his voice stronger now, a hymn to Itzamna that filled the cave with power. The crystal burned hotter, and Ixchel felt its will, not to destroy, but to restore balance. Then Kinish reappeared, her mask gleaming like the moon. "Give it to me," she cried over the chaos, her voice cutting through the din, but Ixchel shook his head. "No, this is my people's burden." The crystal pulsed, and a vision flooded his mind. Palenque in flames, yet also a path to salvation, a sacrifice not of blood but of faith. He ran to the cave's center, where an ancient altar stood, its surface carved with symbols of the sun and jaguar, moss and time's dust covering it. The Spaniards and shadows pursued, their screams mingling with the cave's rumble. Mayana and Chaac fought to hold them back, Mayana wielding a borrowed club, Chaac with his prayers. Ixchel placed the crystal on the altar, and the light exploded, blinding, as if the sun itself had descended into the cave. He knelt, his voice joining Chaac's hymn, "Itzamna and Chaac, hear us. Protect our people." The words poured forth, ancient and powerful, as though from the depths of his soul. The cave shook violently, a fissure opening beneath the altar like a mouth to Xibalba. The crystal's light was swallowed by the darkness, but not before it unleashed a wave of energy that struck down Spaniards and shadows alike. Their screams faded, their bodies collapsing like broken dolls. When the dust settled, the cave was silent, the altar empty. The crystal was gone, as if the gods themselves had taken it. Kinish stood there, her mask now removed, revealing a face both young and ancient, eyes filled with sorrow spanning centuries. "You have done well, Ixchel," she said, her voice soft as the wind. "Balance is restored. But the war is not over." Ixchel helped Mayana and Chaac to their feet, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. Ixchel lay still, his sacrifice a pain deeper than any blade. They carried his body out of the cave, through the cenote, back into the jungle. The water was cold, the currents strong, but they swam, driven by the will to honor their friend. The jungle greeted them with cicadas' song and birds' calls, as though celebrating their survival. The sun rose over Palenque as they returned, its rays warm on their bloodied skin, like a blessing from Itzamna. The people gathered at the city's gates, faces etched with worry and hope. The priests, adorned with feathered crowns and jade necklaces, met them on the pyramid steps. Ixchel told them everything about Kinish Balam, the crystal, the betrayal, Ixchel's sacrifice. His voice broke as he spoke of his friend, but he held his head high. The priests nodded, their eyes shining with reverence. "You have carried the god's will," the elder priest said, his voice like wind over stone, "but the invaders still come. We must prepare." Rumors from the coast spoke of more ships, more men with steel and fire. Ixchel stood atop the pyramid, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had lost much, Ixchel, the crystal, a part of his soul, but he had gained something too. A fire in his heart, a belief in his people's strength. Mayana stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her eyes hard yet warm. "We will fight," she said, her voice steady. Chaac nodded, his prayers now stronger, as if he had found his place as a priest. The jungle sang around them, cicadas and birds, a chorus of life. Palenque would not fall easily. Ixchel gripped his dagger, its edge still sharp, and swore to the gods he would protect his people, no matter what came. Night fell, stars kindled like eyes in the sky, and in their light he saw a future, filled with struggle, but also with hope. He thought of his mother, of Ixchel's laughter, of the children who would grow in the temple's shadow. For them he would fight until his last breath. Yet in the jungle's darkness, shadows still stirred. The Spaniards had not given up, and whispers spoke of a greater army on the coast. Kinish's words echoed in his mind. The war is not over. He felt a pull toward the temple, as if something still called to him. Perhaps more secrets lay hidden beneath the stone, more trials to face. He looked at Mayana and Chaac, their faces marked by grief yet determination. They were his family now, bound by blood and sacrifice. He descended the pyramid steps, the people singing behind him, their voices a chorus carrying the Maya spirit. He paused at the ball court, where warriors trained, tattoos gleaming in torchlight. An old woman, a weaver of stories, sat by a fire, her voice low as she spoke of Pakal and his journey to Xibalba. "There is always a path," she said, her eyes meeting Ixchel's, "for those who dare to walk it." Ixchel nodded, his hand on the dagger. He would walk that path for Palenque, for the gods, for those he loved. The jungle whispered, its secrets yet unrevealed, and he felt his fate unwritten, yet filled with promises of both light and darkness. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun was sinking, and swore to face whatever came with courage and faith. Prologue under en himmel der stigenorna blinkade som gudarnas ögonlag Palenque, meerfolket stolte stad, inbedad I jungelns gröna fam. Trumma ekade I natten, och rökel steg mo templens toppa, der prestena viskade burna, till Itzamna och Chaac. Men I skugorna rörd sig oro, rikten om bleka men fran havit, med vapen av stall och eldsprutand rör. I denna veld av mystic och fara förds en ungjegja. Ixchel, vars skullvevers samman med en uraldrig relic, solens a tjäta, och en kamp för att rädda sitt folk fran undergang. Junjon hurl sina hemligheta tet, men natten viskade, en storm var på väg. Epilogue. The sun rose over Palenque, its rays gleaming on the stones of the pyramids, now marked by the scars of time and battle. Ixchel stood alone at the city's gate, dagger at his belt, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea hid new threats. Ixchel's sacrifice echoed in his heart, but Mayana's strength and Zoc's faith gave him courage. The heart of the sun was gone, returned to the gods, yet its light now burned within him. Behind him the people sang, their voices a chorus of hope in the shadow of war. The jungle whispered, and Ixchel knew, the struggle was not over, but as long as the Maya drew breath, Palenque would stand.